Good evening.
Thank you. You'll have a minute and a half per question. We'll signal you at 15 seconds. On the last question, you've got 2.5 minutes. The integrity of our election system in New Mexico is a key aspect of the job of the New Mexico Secretary of State. What is your view on the issue of voter fraud, and what will you do as Secretary of State to monitor or address it?
Well, I believe, Carla, that voter fraud is a very serious issue to be taken very seriously. But I think fortunately, and I think the evidence that we've seen, including a report that the Secretary of State did to the legislature a couple of years ago here in New Mexico, all of the other documentation, and of course my extensive experience as county clerk here in Bernalillo County has shown that it's also very rare. And so I think what we need to do is make sure that we continue to keep that being very rare. We need to focus our efforts on making it easier to vote and harder to cheat. And I think in terms of making it harder to cheat, there are a lot of things that we can be doing. First and foremost, it's really unclear in the election code as to how these types of situations are to be addressed. The Secretary of State has some authority in terms of investigating and potentially referring to law enforcement these types of cases. But then what we see is sometimes the law enforcement situation, we don't see the kind of follow through that we would like to see for these types of serious offenses. And so I'd like to see something, perhaps a special prosecutor. There's some legislation that we as county clerks had looked into a couple of years ago that I know we're talking about bringing back to the forefront this year. And so there are a variety of ways we can look at making sure that we tighten up the prosecution aspect. As we know, voter fraud is a 4th-degree felony here in New Mexico. It's a very serious crime. And so that's those are a few of the things that I would like to focus on. But I also want to make sure, as I said, that we are protecting the right to vote for all New Mexicans. And so I don't necessarily believe in instigating laws that are going to restrict that right or make it harder or more difficult for people to vote. We just need to be making it harder for people to cheat.
Thank you. New Mexico reportedly has many inactive, deceased, or otherwise invalid registrations on the active voter list. What is your view of this issue, and do you have a plan to address it?
I think that we need to look very holistically at our voter registration database here in New Mexico. I think there's a lot of work that we need to do. We're sort of only scratching the tip of the iceberg in terms of what we can be doing to clean up the voter rolls in New Mexico. Things like the voter confirmation mailing that goes out once every 2 years, the occasional data files that we get from the Vital Statistics Department or from corrections. We need to be making these databases talk to each other. We need to be getting regular updated information so that we are able to really quickly identify and remove people from the voting rolls who no longer belong on them. I believe we need to be engaging in interstate database sharing. So if we have someone move to Texas or if someone comes here from another state, we are able to update the voter registration accordingly by reaching out to that voter to remove them to the rolls or add them to the rolls. By having better data connections with MVD, right now it's not an automated process, it's a manual process. We might be able to more quickly and better update voter registration. I believe we need to, the address, the voter registration address. I believe that we need to ensure that the MVD voter registration process is functioning the way that I believe it can here in New Mexico. Right now our numbers are very low. When you go to do a transaction, a license, or a registration at MVD, we're not seeing the numbers, and that's a place where we could better update our voter registration rules as well.
Thank you. Do you support or oppose online and same-day voter registration in New Mexico? Please explain.
I certainly support online voter registration. I have been an advocate for it. The legislature passed a baby step that will be going into effect next summer in terms of people being able to make voter registration updates online. And I think that we need to have full online voter registration in New Mexico. There are 20 states currently in the United States that are undergoing this method of voter registration. And what we're seeing is that voters who are finding it that easy to register and take part in our electoral process are having higher rates of participation. And so that's something that I'm very concerned about, is making sure that we improve voter turnout and voter participation in our democracy, because I believe that our democracy can only function at its best when we have broad participation from across the electorate. In terms of same-day registration, I do support it because first and foremost, the 28-day deadline here in New Mexico is really arbitrary. That was from a time when we county clerks had to physically handwrite the voter rosters on election day. We don't need that full amount of time anymore. We have all the technology and tools available to not only facilitate voter registration at the polls, but also to make sure that we are keeping that process secure. And we also have a process currently in place called a provisional ballot, where a voter can come to the polls, and if they're not found on the rolls, they can fill out a voter registration, and unfortunately that ballot may not count. But why wouldn't we want to ensure that people who are citizens of New Mexico are able to take a part in our election process? I think that's a core belief that we should hold.
Thank you. Do you support or oppose legislation requiring voter identification? Please explain.
So as folks may or may not know, we do have a voter ID law on the books in New Mexico, and currently that law permits the voter to use a variety of types of ID when they go to the polls. But I think that what we've seen is that voter ID unfortunately addresses a very, very so small piece of the potential voter fraud that we see out there. It's something in the realm of 31 votes out of 1 billion votes cast in a 12-year period in the United States were due to people showing up to the polls pretending to be somebody else. That's the one type of voter fraud that voter ID can actually help prevent. And unfortunately, in states that have implemented voter ID, we're seeing a lot of disenfranchisement occur. We're seeing tens to hundreds of thousands of voters in those states potentially disenfranchised either due to not having the right type of ID or not having their name match on an ID or an address. In fact, a federal judge in Texas just last week struck down the voter ID law there and made it on the grounds that it was a poll tax, because the hoops that people were being required to jump through in order to get the certain specific type of ID that they needed. So I don't believe we need to move backward into that old era where we were restricting the right to vote and making requirements and erecting hurdles to the ballot box. I believe we need to be fostering that participation again. Again, I really only believe that our democracy can function at its best when we have widespread participation and when we are trying to facilitate voting rather than restrict voting.
Thank you. This one you've got 2.5 minutes.
Okay.
Please tell the hiring committee why you believe you are the best candidate to represent the people of New Mexico as Secretary of State.
Well, thank you once again, Carla, and I want to thank the New Mexico Business Coalition for hosting this event tonight, and I'm really pleased to be a part of it. I believe that I'm best qualified for a variety of reasons. I've served as county clerk in the state's largest county for the last 8 years. A third of the electorate of the state resides here in Bernalillo County, and I can tell you, and I know there's a lot of candidates in this room, we've been through a lot of elections together, if there's any type of voting process or problem or issue that can arise in the course of an election here in New Mexico, it's bound to happen here in Bernalillo County. And I bring my master's degree in political science with me. I'm a very data-driven, analytic person. I implement extensive planning in advance of every election to make sure that not only we are serving the public and the voters here in Bernalillo County the best way we can, streamlining the voting process, and we've also managed to save over $1 million per election cycle by implementing some of the modernization processes that we've implemented here in Bernalillo County. And in fact, the bipartisan election commission that the president formed last year found the things that we are doing in Bernalillo County to be best practices and is using them as recommendations for election officials and jurisdictions across the nation. So I think that's something that we have to be proud of here in New Mexico. That's the work that I've done here in Bernalillo County, and that is the type of work and type of ethic that I will bring to the Secretary of State's office. I'm going to take a very holistic approach to administering elections in New Mexico. I believe we need to be focused on the election cycle from birth to death, from soup to nuts. We need to be looking at every aspect: voter registration, poll worker training, voter education and outreach, which is something that we have hardly any of here in New Mexico right now. Voters don't necessarily know where, how, where, and when they can cast their ballot, and we need to fix that here in New Mexico moving forward. So there are a wide variety of issues that I would address as Secretary of State that I believe we need to address. I think that we have a lot of progress to make here in the state, but I do believe that we have the potential to not only as we are here in Bernalillo County, but across the state to serve as a model for election administration, to streamline the process statewide, to make those improvements, to bring technology and tools and resources to county clerk's office. offices, and again, to provide that education and information to voters statewide. That is what I will do as your Secretary of State, and if I am honored enough to have your vote on November 4th, I promise you I will serve with integrity, and I ask for that vote, and thank you very much for the opportunity here today. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Maggie, please.